Why would anyone choose not to believe in the existence of an invisible God? But for some people, it's not just that God is invisible and unseen. From their perspective, God has never done anything for them. God has never said anything that matters. And they have never felt close to God. And so God's sightings, God's stillness, God's silence, and God's separation are some obvious and understandable reasons why some people choose not to believe. I want you to know that the Bible does address these reasons. Psalm 14 verses 1 through 3. A fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. Their deeds are vile. There is no one who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven on all mankind to see if there are any who understand, any who seek God. All have turned away. All have become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one. Don't misunderstand God. God can choose to tell us yes, no, wait, or he can choose to not say anything to us at all or show us anything at all. These Psalms answer a lot of questions, and they tell us why God's sightings are so rare, or God's stillness is there and he doesn't just move, or God's silence is there and he doesn't speak to all of us or respond to our prayers in the way that we tell him to, or God's separation is there and he feels so far away and we don't feel close to him. These Psalms tell us it's because of us. It's because of our corruption. It's because we aren't seeking him. It's because we have turned away from him. These Psalms also address some of the deeper reasons why some people choose not to believe, which includes our own self-centeredness. We get so focused on ourselves that even if God is saying something and God is doing something, we don't see it. We don't notice it because we're so focused on ourselves. Another deeper reason is our own self-reliance. Some people don't think they really need God. Sometimes we get so dependent on ourselves that we're not trying to see God. We're not trying to understand God. Another reason is our selfishness. Some people choose to deny God or not believe in his existence because if God existed, that would require them to give up something that they don't want to give up. It's not that the idea of the existence of God contradicts itself. It's that the idea of the existence of God contradicts them and what they want. And so for some people, it's just better or easier if God doesn't exist, because then they can live however they want to live without God getting involved. The final reason is that for a lot of people, it's all about suffering. They think that there is no way that a God who is typically described as all-powerful and typically described as all-knowing could exist with all of the problems and all of the pressure and all of the pain and suffering in this world. There's a lot of suffering, some caused by God that he produced as punishment, and others caused by us that God has permitted. Among the many other things that God is described as, he's described as a father. And so those of you who are parents might understand this more than anyone else. And children often misunderstand, and we often misunderstand God as a father. Genesis, which begins with God creating, continues with God destroying everything he created with a flood as punishment. You may disagree with his punishment, but it doesn't mean you have to deny him. Parents also sometimes just permit suffering so that their children can learn lessons on their own. God does the same. Sometimes he permits suffering that's not caused by him. Think about all the suffering that we have caused for one another because we have decided not to do things the way God wants us to do it. God has done a lot despite our self-centeredness and our self-reliance and our selfishness and all the suffering we have caused by ignoring him and denying him. Please don't misunderstand. God can exist as an intelligent person with a will and a right to choose how he wants to reveal himself or not reveal himself to us. And we can disagree with how he has chosen to reveal himself or not reveal himself. He can exist as a father who punishes or disciplines the children that he loves. God can exist as a father who permits his children to suffer. That doesn't mean we have to deny him. There is more than one reason why some people choose to believe in God, even though most of us have never seen him face to face. Before I start talking about a few of these reasons, let me make two important points. One, the Bible acknowledges that God is invisible. My second point, and this may be even more important than my first point, the Bible highlights the idea that God's invisibility is not an acceptable excuse to ignore him. In Romans chapter 1, verse 20, Paul writes, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." I believe that God exists because he is the best explanation for our existence. And he is the best explanation for the eyewitness observations of others. Firstly, our existential origins. There are three words that summarize this idea for me: cosmology, causality, and complexity. Cosmology refers to the origins of the entire universe, which includes my origins and yours. I believe that everything that exists was created by God or created from something that God already created. I realize that there are other explanations for our existence, including that something suddenly came from nothing, or that something evolved over time. But for me, I believe that God is the creator. Causality describes one of the reasons why I have accepted the idea, rejected any other explanation for our origins other than creation. I don't believe that something can come from nothing without someone causing it. And I believe that God caused our existence. And I don't leave that up to chance. Think about it. If something came from nothing, or something can come from nothing, then why aren't some things coming from nothing right now? Why aren't things just popping into existence right now without a cause? Complexity is another reason why I have rejected any explanation for our existential origins other than that God created us. It's because you and I are too complex, and most of the things in the cosmos, in the universe, are too complex and function too well to be left to random chance. Anything that is complex requires an engineer. It requires a creator. It requires a causer. And for me, that creator, that causer is God. Secondly, I believe that God is the best explanation for the eyewitness observations of others. I have never seen God, but I am humble and reasonable enough to accept the idea that there are things that exist that are greater than me that I have never seen, but maybe someone else has. The question is, why would I accept or believe in the eyewitness observations of others? There are three words that sum up the three reasons. One, because they're numerous. Two, because they're non-collaborative. And three, because they are non-profit. Numerous refers to the idea that it's more than one. If this was one person who came and said, "I saw God," I would be a lot more skeptical. But you have numerous observations and numerous people throughout history claiming to have encounters with God. Keep in mind that the Bible is not just one book. It's a collection of 66 separate writings, 66 separate books that were written by about 40 something authors. I do not believe that God wrote the Bible. I believe that people wrote the Bible who claim to have experiences and encounters with God. We can choose to believe them, or we can choose not to believe them. All that I would encourage you to do is not ignore them just because you haven't experienced what they've seen and experienced. The second word, non-collaborative, explains one of the reasons why I have chosen to accept the eyewitness observations of some others and to believe what they wrote about this invisible God. It's not like these 40 authors came together and collaborated on these works in a meeting. And although you can connect the dots between some of the writers and other writers, it's not like they collaborated. And you can see that when it comes to their writings and some of the differences and the different perspectives that they wrote from. Some people view those differences as contradictions in the Bible and use that to explain why you should reject all of the eyewitness observations. But for me, those differences and the fact that their writings are non-collaborative make me believe it even more. The last thing that I want you to think about when it comes to these eyewitness observations is that they were non-profit. The people who wrote about their experiences and their encounters with God, they had nothing to gain. As a matter of fact, they risked a lot. Some of them risked their reputation as they wrote about how they rebelled against God and committed crimes and committed sins. Others were actually beaten and stoned for this message. Others were put to death for this message. I encourage you not to ignore the invisible God. In the end, God's invisibility will not be an acceptable excuse to ignore him.